Hey everybody, welcome back to another Team Player Gaming video. Hope you're hyped for Secrets of Magic because we got brand new types of spellcasting. Today I want to talk about one in particular, and that is Cathartic Magic. Let's just get right into it. So, Cathartic Magic is magic that is fueled by a particularly strong emotion, very similar to how Barbarian Rage works. However, unlike barbarians, the emotion does not have to be anger. There are many emotions that can fuel Cathartic Magic, but I'll get into those later in the video. This emotion can be pent up or not. All that matters for Cathartic Magic is that the emotion in question is strong for your character. Usually after using Cathartic Magic, you have some sort of emotional fallout determined by the emotion in question. Usually this involves some sort of penalty or bad condition, such as fatigued or frightened. In order to get rid of your emotional fallout, you must do some kind of mundane activity for 10 minutes. This can be anything from reading to crafting something to even meditation. Also, you must keep in mind that Cathartic Magic requires a lot of role-playing on your parts. Before building a character that uses Cathartic Magic, you need to make sure that these rules are okay with your GM and the other players. Just because you enter an emotional fervor does not allow your character to do anything. You need to make sure that what you're doing is okay to everyone at the table, not just you. Also, the emotion of your Cathartic Magic shouldn't overshadow other aspects of your character. This emotion is a powerful emotion, but not your only one. The power of Cathartic Magic can be a double-edged sword, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a deep inner struggle for your character, or even something mysterious that your character wants to investigate. For you GMs out there, one of the reasons that this type of magic is uncommon is that it takes adjustments on your parts. Some situations that would normally be detrimental to a PC can instead allow them to power up with this type of magic. But some emotions require a PC or NPC to be an emotional focus. This could make this type of magic utterly useless if the PC isn't near their focus. Also, in the right circumstances, you could allow your players to use certain aspects of this type of magic before they even pursue it. For example, if one of your NPCs attacks a person that your player's character has a devotion to, you might allow them to take the reaction from the Cathartic Mage dedication. Like any reaction, the player in question can choose whether or not to take it. After that point, the player might be interested in this archetype. So how does the Cathartic Mage dedication work? Well, in order to take the first dedication feat, you need a charisma of at least 14 or the ability to cast spells from spell slots. When you select this dedication, choose one emotion from the emotional states I will go over later in this video. If you don't already cast spells from spell slots, then you become a spontaneous caster. You gain a spell repertoire with one cantrip of your choice from any spell list. As normal, you are trained in spell attack rules and spell DCs for that tradition, and your spellcasting ability modifier is Charisma. If you can already cast spells from spell slots, you gain one additional cantrip of your spell tradition. If you're a prepared caster, you can cast this cantrip in addition to your other prepared spells for the day. If you're a spontaneous caster, add this spell to your spell repertoire. You gain the Catharsis reaction and the Settle Emotions activity. The Catharsis reaction's trigger is determined by your emotion. When you use this reaction, you gain the activation effects listed for your emotion. You also gain that emotion's emotional fervor benefits for 3 rounds. When your emotional fervor ends, you suffer the listed emotional fallout. After using this reaction, you can't use it again until you settle your emotions. With the Settle Emotions activity, you spend 10 minutes using techniques you developed to calm your emotions and bring them back under control. This allows you to use your Catharsis reaction again. The next feat you can take for the Cathartic Mage archetype is Basic Cathartic Spellcasting. This gives you the basic spellcasting benefits like any other spellcasting dedication. However, unlike other spellcasting dedications, you also gain one spell from your chosen tradition every time you gain spell slots from this archetype. this must be the same level as the spell that you just gained. So when you take this feat at 4th level, you gain 2 first level spells instead of 1. By taking the Cathartic Focus Spell feat, you gain the focus spell listed under your emotions entry. However, you can only cast that focus spell when you're in an emotional fervor. If you don't already have one, you gain a focus pool of 1 focus point, and you can refocus while using Settle Emotions. At 8th level, you can take the Work Yourself Up feat. In order to use this feat, you must have a reaction available and can't be prevented from using Catharsis. For 2 actions, you can use your Catharsis reaction, causing the Catharsis activation and entering your emotional fervor as normal. However, the fervor only lasts until the end of your turn. When your turn is over, you experience the effects of your emotional fallout as normal. This feat is simply a way for you to use your Catharsis reaction during your turn and possibly get around the trigger. Could be a fantastic feat, just depends on what your emotion is. At level 12, you can take Expert Cathartic Spellcasting to gain the Expert Spellcasting benefits. You need Basic Cathartic Spellcasting to take this feat. Also, remember, because of Basic Cathartic Spellcasting, you gain an additional spell of each level you can cast from this archetype. So when you take this feat at 4th level, you gain 2 4th level spells instead of 1. Also at 12th level, you can take the Infectious Emotions feat. When you use your Catharsis reaction, you can also grant the activation benefits to 1 ally within 30 feet. If these benefits require an emotional focus, your ally uses your emotional focus. In some situations, you may not be able to grant your ally the activation bonus. For example, if your emotion is Pride, you can only give the activation effect to an ally if both you and the ally critically failed the same saving throw against the same effect. Excellent teamwork potential here, but it really depends on what emotion you are, too. Finally, at 18th level, you can take the Master Cathartic Spellcasting feat. This grants you the Master Spellcasting benefits. This feat requires Expert Cathartic Spellcasting to take. And remember, Basic Cathartic Spellcasting gives you an extra spell of each spell level that you can cast with this archetype. Each emotional state that you can pick from has the following information. The first is the event or condition you need to meet to take your Catharsis reaction. This is known as the Catharsis trigger. The second is the benefit you gain immediately upon using the reaction, called the activation. The third is the benefit you gain while in your emotional fervor. Next is the effect you experience when your emotional fervor ends. The last bit of information you gain from the entry is the focus spell you gain if you select the Cathartic Focus Spell feat. The first emotion you have access to is Anger. In order to use the reaction from this emotion, an enemy must damage you. You cannot use your reaction if you are fatigued. If you are grabbed, immobilized, or restrained, you can attempt to escape with this reaction. If you succeed, whatever is imposing the condition on you takes force damage equal to your level. While under the effects of your emotional fervor, you gain the effects of the Dangerous Sorcery Sorcerer feat. You are also able to cast the Draw Ire spell while in your emotional fervor. When your emotional fervor ends, you become fatigued until you settle your emotions. Taking the Cathartic Focus Spell feat gives you access to the Athletic Rush Focus spell. The Awe Emotions reaction trigger is that you or an ally within 30 feet critically succeed on an attack roll against an enemy or on a skill check against an enemy's DC. If you're fascinated or stupefied when you use this reaction, you can attempt an additional save to end the effect, as long as the original effect allowed a save. The emotional fervor for this spell is that when you cast a spell, choose one creature that was hit by your spell attack roll or that failed its saving throw, if any. That creature becomes fascinated with you until the end of its next turn. It is then temporarily immune to this effect for 1 hour. While in your emotional fervor, you can also cast the Glitter Dust spell. When your emotional fallout begins, you become flat-footed until you settle your emotions. If you gain the focus spell for this emotion, then you can cast Dazzling Flash without a religious symbol. The dedication emotion requires an emotional focus. The emotional focus is an individual creature that you are bound to. The trigger for your catharsis reaction is that your emotional focus is within 30 feet of you and takes damage. Using this reaction gives your emotional focus a number of temporary hit points equal to half your level rounded up. These hit points last for 1 minute. While you are in your emotional fervor, your spells that target your emotional focus gain the benefits of the Reach spell feat. In addition, whenever you cast a healing spell that affects your emotional focus, they gain temporary hit points equal to your spell's level in addition to the spell's other effects. These temporary hit points last for 1 minute too. While in your emotional fervor, you can also cast the Spirit Link spell. While under your emotional fallout, until you settle your emotions, you can't cast spells unless you're adjacent to your emotional focus. The focus spell for the dedication emotion is Protector's Sacrifice. The fear emotion is actually a pretty good one for this type of magic. The trigger for your reaction is that an enemy would make you frightened. Using this reaction increases your frightened value by 1 up to a maximum of frightened 4. Why is that good? Because of the emotional fervor. While under your emotional fervor, you don't take the status penalty for being frightened to your spell attack rolls or spell DCs. Instead, you gain a bonus to your spell attack rolls equal to the penalty you would have taken. Also, your foes take a penalty on saves against your spells equal to the penalty you would have taken to your DC. Everything else takes the status penalty as normal. While under the effects of your emotional fervor, you can also cast the Fear spell. When your emotional fallout begins, you are fleeing for 2 rounds, running from the source of the frightened condition that triggered the reaction. If the source is no longer present, you flee from the position where you were at the start of your emotional fallout. The focus spell that you can gain from this emotion is Waking Nightmare. The hatred emotion is another one that requires an emotional focus. Your emotional focus is an enemy that you detest. The trigger for your reaction is that you start your first turn in an encounter against your emotional focus or one of their followers. If the encounter in question has multiple eligible followers but doesn't include your actual emotional focus, choose one of the followers to act as your emotional focus for this encounter, or until your actual emotional focus shows up. Using your reaction allows you to step or stride. You must end this movement closer to your emotional focus. While under emotional fervor, your emotional focus is flat-footed to you and takes a -2 penalty to saves against your spells. You are also flat-footed to your emotional focus and take a -2 status penalty to any saves against effects it uses against you. The spell that you can cast while under your emotional fervor is Blood Vendetta. When your emotional fervor ends, you become stunned too. The focus spell that you can gain from this emotion is Cry of Destruction. The joy emotion can be very good if you use emotion effects a lot. The trigger for your reaction is that you critically succeed on an attack roll or save, or an enemy critically fails on a save against you. Using this reaction allows you to reduce any frightened or stupefied condition you have by 1, and in any persistent mental damage you have. While under your emotional fervor, you gain a +1 status bonus to performance checks and to spell attack rolls of emotion spells. Also, your enemies take a -1 status penalty to saves against your emotion spells. Also, while under your emotional fervor, you can cast Hideous Laughter. When your emotional fervor ends, you become fatigued until you settle your emotions. The focus spell you can gain from the joy emotion is Unimpeded Stride. The emotional focus for the love emotion is someone you're in love with. They are not required to love you back. Use your reaction if your emotional focus would take damage from an enemy while within 30 feet of you. When you use this reaction, if either you or your emotional focus is confused or control, one of you can attempt a new saving throw against that effect, ending the condition on a success. If you're both eligible, your emotional focus gets the save. While under your emotional fervor, you gain a +1 status bonus to will saves. If you cast a spell that benefits your emotional focus, this bonus increases to +3 until the start of your next turn. The spell you gain while under emotional fervor is the Soothe spell. Your emotional fallout is that you're fascinated with your emotional focus for 1 minute. Taking the Cathartic Focus Spell feat gives you access to the Soothing Words Focus Spell. Like persistent damage, then the misery emotion is for you. The trigger for your reaction is that you gain persistent damage from a foe. Activating this reaction gives you a number of temporary hit points equal to your level for 1 minute. While under your emotional fervor, you can choose not to attempt a flat check to end any persistent damage you're taking. When you cast a damaging spell, you can choose one creature that failed to save or that you hit with your spell attack roll. They take persistent damage of the same type the spell dealt, of an amount equal to the highest amount of persistent damage you currently have. However, you can't choose a creature that's already taking persistent damage. You can cast Phantom Pain while under your emotional fervor. While under your emotional fallout, you take an untyped penalty to any damage that you would deal with any spell you cast until you settle your emotions. This penalty is -1 per spell level. The focus spell for this emotion is Savor the Sting. If you cast illusion spells a lot, you may want to pick up the Pride emotion. The trigger for your reaction is you critically fail on an attack roll or saving throw. Using this reaction turns your critical failure into a failure. While under your emotional fervor, each time you cast an illusion spell until the start of your next turn, any critical failure that you roll on an attack roll or saving throw turns into a failure instead. While under your emotional fervor, you can also cast Color Spray. When your emotional fervor ends, you become confused for 1 round and can cast Mirror Image. This emotion allows you to cast Veil of Confidence if you have the focus spell for it. Alright, the last emotion we have right now is Remorse. The trigger for your reaction is that an ally within 30 feet is reduced to 0 hit points. Using this reaction allows you to step or stride, but you must end your movement closer to the triggering ally. While under your emotional fervor, any spell you cast that restores hit points to the triggering ally gets a status bonus to the hit points healed equal to the spell's level, or double the spell's level if the ally is at 0 hit points. You gain the Warrior's Regret spell while under your emotional fervor. When your emotional fervor ends, you become Stupefied 2 until you settle your emotions. The focus spell that you can gain from this emotion is Healer's Blessing. This emotion has really good teamwork potential for anyone with the Divine or Primal list. And that's going to wrap up this video. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. You can also check out my Facebook and my Twitter pages. But if you really want to support me, you can check out my Patreon page. Links are in the description. I'm going to continue my Secrets of Magic coverage in the next few weeks, so look out for those videos. And until next time, remember, teamwork is vital.